My name is Sally McNamara. I've been a master gardener for quite some time. I was a children's librarian at a school for most of that time as well. Love books, and I thought it would be really fun to share some of our favorites, children's, how to garden, things about nature, and field guides, so that you could just have some good ideas about great books we like.
Hello, I'm Gail Mayfeld. I've been a master gardener since 2007, and prior to that I was an elementary school librarian. So storybooks, or children's books as they like to be called, are sort of a passion. I like to call them everybody books because everybody can read a book such as Begin with a Bee, which is about the resurgence of the rusty patch bee. This is the front and this is the back. The interesting thing about everybody books is they make great gifts. My family is very accustomed to receiving a book like this or some of the others I'll be speaking about as a birthday gift, a housewarming, a special event gift for their coffee table. Anyway, Beginning with a Bee. It's by Lisa Ketchum Briggs and Phyllis Root. Phyllis Root is a Twin Cities resident, and it goes through the life cycle of the rusty patch bee. It even shows the cocoons, the cocoon stage.
And we care about the rusty patch because it's an endangered Minnesota bee.
Yes,
very endangered.
it is, and it's staging a comeback. The nice thing about many everybody books, and another part of it that you should be aware of, is in the back of nonfiction books and some of the other storybooks, there are facts, like the rusty patch bumblebee. 10 things you can do to help invite a rusty patch bee to your garden. And the 10 things are in pictures along the side. It's a very interesting book. A book that's near and dear to my heart is this one by Carol Lerner, Butterflies in the Garden. Butterflies everywhere, and why not create a garden where you would attract your own butterflies? There's an interesting part to this book, and it's the end papers in the front and in the back, because you're going to see in the text these butterflies talked about, and you can return to these end papers because they are all labeled, and then you will become familiar. I have personally used this book for first and second graders, and they love the color, and they just think butterflies are such a delicate feature to the garden. Butterflies cannot hover like a hummingbird. Instead, they need a broad blossom like a zinnia, a marigold, Joe Pye weed in order to land, and then they can do their business. This page shows the anatomy of the blossoms, and it also shows a little bit about the butterfly. Small children, second and third graders, like big words. And this is a diagram of the eye and the butterfly head with the proboscis unrolled. That's this thing. That's what goes down deep into the flower to get the nectar. This is a picture of it curled up. Beautiful illustrations again. They are accurate. The flowers are also labeled. Here's zinnia, cosmos, nasturtium, marigold. Now, it's always good to have an activity, especially if you're reading to your grandchildren. And making this butterfly puddle is such an activity. You take a very shallow pan, not deeper than a pie plate, and you put playground sand in it and some rocks that are about 3-4 inches across, because remember, butterflies need to land on something. And then you keep it just just moist with water so that it comes above the sand. Many times after a thunderstorm or a little shower, you will see butterflies on the concrete. They are drinking water. They will not land on moving water. It has to be still water. And they like the concrete and the sand water because it has salt in it that they need for survival. So make a little puddling pan. And then we have more flowers. This also talks about the caterpillars and the plants that they need. And these are labeled like thistle, white, sweet clover, and milkweed. Here's dill for the swallowtail. Create your own garden, and you will attract many butterflies. All the books I'm talking about are available at the Dakota County Library. If you do not have a library card, you are missing out on a treasure. Dakota County, we are very blessed here to have all these wonderful books. This is Let's Get Gardening by Dorleen Kindersley. Dorleen Kindersley is a publisher, but they do bright colored books. Notice the end papers here, very colorful. And this book has a beautiful table of contents where you can find out how to grow leeks, how to grow beets, how to grow carrots. Because many children don't realize what people go through for the food supply. Here it gives a little list of the tools you need, which you probably know, but it's a step-by-step progression of the tiny seeds. Then it has this very interesting chapter, I thought, of why recycle the garden. Well, it's got all sorts of ways that you can use a teacup. You can use a plastic water bottle. You can even find a place to grow some food for your pet. It's really a fun book. It's very colorful. And here are strawberry boots. If you have some boots that the kiddos have grown through, I thought these were sweet. You poke holes in them so they have a place to breathe, and it shows you how you can put some flowers in them or some strawberries. Just a fun way to get the kids outdoors and show them how to garden. Creek finding. This is a true story. How does a creek get lost? Well, especially a creek that was started long ago, with a spring that burbled up to the ground and tumbled itself across a prairie valley. Well, the creek didn't lose itself. It's that a farmer, and I know farmers that have done this, came in with big machinery and they covered up the creek. They covered up the wetland so that they could farm. Now back into the late 20th and 21st century, conservation, soil, and wildlife stepped in and started to show farmers how they could reclaim bogs, peat bogs, and wetlands, and how important those wetlands were to cleansing fertilization, the runoff of fertilization. And this goes through step by step how Mike the farmer recreated his wetland and recreated the spring. The big machines came back. They even had cement mixers come in to dump the rock into the bed of the creek. The owls came back to the trees. Mike put in some baby fish, fingerlings fish. And after a while, he had his lovely creekside back. Plus, in the back of this book, there again are some notes. Illustrator's note, an author's note, and more about Mike the farmer who found his lost creek. This is a great gift book, great coffee table book. It's by Phyllis Root, a Twin Cities author, and the illustrator Betsy Bowen. Then, once Prairie stretched for thousands of miles, over 40% of western Minnesota on through Nebraska and Kansas was what they called prairie, or wildlife prairie. Wildflowers, alfalfa, different grasses, until machinery came in and changed the footprint. They started farming in fields. But you can, if you plant a pocket of prairie, who might come? Well, you can get a bird, you can get a hummingbird, you can get a butterfly, and you can get a frog, a chickadee, all kinds of great books. Again, lots of facts in the back of the book. How gone is gone. And we do need to be appreciative of this. In the city of Burnsville, we are fortunate to have 2 restored prairies. One is at County Road 11 and Lake Alamagnet Parkway. The second one is the Rudy Kramer Nature Preserve. It's located on South Highway 13 and Chowan Avenue. But Pocket of Prairie, a great book to help people understand the importance of having quiet, unfarmed, undisturbed land. Then The Lost Forest isn't exactly a gardening book, but it has a great Minnesota story. How do you lose a forest?
Yeah, this one. I forgot the one.
Well, The Lost Forest by Phyllis Root and Betsy Bowen. Don't they make a good combination? If you first need a forest to lose, a forest like the red pines and white pines that once towered in Minnesota, the trees that have never been logged. Trees so tall you had to crane your neck back, and even then you couldn't see their tops. Trees so big 2 people could hardly wrap their arms around them. Well, in the late 1800s, Minnesota's red and white pines were prime logging trees. So in 1882, the government sent a crew of surveyors to northern Minnesota because the logging companies were just breathless over finding trees to cut down. And they did their surveying, and here are the men. They had quite primitive tools and clothing compared to what we have today to be outdoors. Well, it got to be November and it got to be cold, and probably their provisions were running low, and they got to their last section of land. Well, when they looked at it, they could see that there were some beautiful trees, but it was quite marshy, and there was a lake. So in his journal, the head surveyor noted that although there are many trees, there's also a 10-acre lake, and it makes for a lot of wet marsh ground. Well, no logging company wanted to harvest trees out of a lake and a marsh. So this 114 acres square between Walker and Bemidji, Minnesota, were left untouched. And they were left untouched until 1958, when a forest ranger happened upon this great stand of trees. And actually what had happened is the surveyor had miscalculated how large the lake was, but it allowed these trees to grow. And today you can go to the Lost 40 site and see these 350-year-old trees. You can discuss with whoever you're reading to all the wildlife that depended on the trees. There was a lady slipper, a fox, an owl, woodpecker, a thrush, and a skunk. It is part of the Chippewa National Forest, so will always remain Minnesota's Lost 40. This would be a great housewarming gift to somebody in Minnesota. Great coffee table conversation book. Now, my last book I debated on, it's Can You Hear Trees Talking? And since trees are such an important part of our ecological landscape, if this would be for an older child, I thought it was important to look at some of the lessons in here. There is an opportunity for interactive, a journey of discovery, how trees work, and what do tree children learn at school? Well, you learn to look at the tree. You look how to decide how old this tree is by nodes in the tiny branch. Your classroom becomes the tree. It gets the children outside. I was raised on a Northwest Iowa farm right in the center of an oak savanna with a generous smattering of walnut, hickory, catalpa, elm trees. We were involved with our nature. We knew that there were fox, raccoon, owls, all kinds of things in that woods, plus the hickory nuts and the walnuts that were picked in the fall. Children today don't understand the importance of human and nature coexistence and being able to go out there and touch it. This book, Can You Hear Trees Talking?, allows the children to learn that. Dear tree frog, this would make a great baby gift. I see you suddenly among the tangled green tiny dollop, a tiny, tiny, tiny frog, where before there was only a leaf. Well, this little girl, this shy little girl, has to move. And she's not too happy. So she hides out in the shrubbery and spies a tree frog. She asks the tree frog, "Did you have to move too?" The interesting thing about this book, in a very deliberate font over here on your left side, there's a little girl speaking. And then down here in a different font is some scientific information about the frog, which makes it another learning experience. So she talks to the frog and they become fast friends. Again, the back of this book, where can I find a tree frog? How do I know if tree frogs live near me? And the beautiful end papers. This is just a sampling of the books available. All these books are available at the Dakota County Library. These are some that spoke to Sally and myself. We encourage you, if you don't have a library card, to be sure and get one. Happy reading.
But most of her books are poetry, and most of them are focused on nature. And to choose one was very challenging, but this is her newest one. But she has written many fascinating poetry books for children about nature. Joyce Sidman. The book talks is going to be about books about how to garden or how to manage plants, that kind of thing. I'm going to start with a book about houseplants. I actually do not like houseplants. They're sort of a bother, but this book changed my mind. There's a whole bunch of wonderful, the titles of every chapter are great. Plants for calm and relaxation. Plants for a breath of fresh air. Plants for a good night's sleep. Plants to improve well-being. Plants that bring joy and happiness. Who wouldn't want that? And plants to help you get well soon. Plants to boost brain power and focus. And then the pictures in this book are very spare and very effective. Here's an example of rooting. It's a very zen kind of gardening book. It would make a lovely gift. as Gail likes to mention. In fact, I bought this as a gift and have forgotten to give it to my daughter-in-law, but I will someday after I've used it. Okay, the next book is Native Plants of the Midwest. This is the other book that motivated me to want to do this besides Plant a Pocket of Prairie. I will admit to everyone that Alan Branhagen is someone on whom I have a very large crush. He is the Director of Operations at the University of Minnesota Landscape Arboretum now. He wasn't that when he wrote this book, but he is now. And he gives wonderful talks. If you ever listen to the Arboretum plant series, he's just great. He really brings plants down to the level that everybody can embrace them and understand the value of what he's talking about. 500 species of native plants identified in detail. A wonderful book. Very thorough, alphabetical order. Well, they're in categories. So like trees, shrubs, perennials, and vines. Just everything you want to know about native plants. Obviously, the introduction talks about the extreme value of them because Alan's quite a proponent of that. So everyone should have this book in their library if they care about natives at all. And it makes a fabulous gift. I give it to all my children's friends when they buy a house. They get this. The next book is a book that was recommended to me when we were doing a presentation on pruning. It's the Essential Pruning Techniques, Trees, Shrubs, and Conifers, and that is exactly what it is. There are lots of books about pruning. This one's, in my opinion, the most complete, the most comprehensive, the most detailed. The first section describes a lot of how to prune, because there are lots of different things that you do depending on what plant you're doing and what stage you are. But it describes in great, well-defined how to prune, and then it goes plant by plant through many, many, many plants, exactly how to prune the plant, and many pictures of them actually doing it. But it's just the number of plants that are indexed in here is really amazing. It's the comprehensiveness of it that really appeals to me. Just any plant that you can think of that needs pruning, this book covers it. The one caveat that I'll give about this book is that the index is excellent, and the common names of the plants are always listed along with the Latin. Sometimes within the book, when you get to that page, it won't repeat the common name, and so you have to sort of learn the Latin. But this is a very serious book, and I should comment that these two people actually are the people that do the pruning at Kew Gardens in England, which is one of the largest collections of plant material in the world. So they've seen more than most. The next book is something everybody should have, and there's a lot of choices in this category too, the Well-Tended Perennial Garden, but a number of my friends have recommended this as the most comprehensive about perennials, their habits, and when to plant, when to pinch back, that kind of thing. Everything you want to know about perennials, and obviously, again, listed in alphabetical order, most of the perennials that you'd ever run into in the gardening situation. And it's always difficult to sort of separate perennials and natives because there's a tremendous amount of crossover, and many times a perennial that's listed here would be actually a variety of a native that's been maybe bred to have some different characteristics that would be more garden friendly, like maybe it stays smaller, or maybe it doesn't bloom as early, or some characteristic that a gardener might like. So the best book we could identify about perennials is it'll take the plant in the habitat that it's describing. In this case it's prairie, and it'll describe the plant, where it grows, its conditions, and then it'll identify all the different insects that come to it, and usually when they come and what they do when they get there, because not all of them do the same thing. This one actually goes on for several pages because the goldenrod is a very, very valuable plant on the prairie. And there's many plants like that. Well defined in this book, and you can see that the color photographs are absolutely awesome. I would like to add that Heather has a wonderful book just on bees, and a new book just on wasps. I've had trouble opening the wasp books because wasps and I haven't been getting along lately, but if you want to know anything about all the kinds of wasps that are available in our region, that would be Heather Holm would have written that book. The last book in the section on general gardening is my favorite herb book. Herb gardening is one of my favorite things. And I looked at many herb books before I chose this one as my favorite. And the reason I did it, the reason I like this one is it obviously describes all the herbs in detail at the end. It has a whole list and it'll tell you all the growing conditions and what you might do with the herb. Maybe sometimes the historical value of an herb, because herbs many times have a lot of history and have influenced society in many ways. But the first part of this book actually has wonderful guidance on how to garden with herbs. How not just to have an herb garden, but how to put herbs into the garden in a variety of ways. It just has a lot of information about how they might mix with other plants, what their habits are, just how to use them more than just having a little herb garden in the back. I really like this book by Tammy Hartwick.
Vegetables, illustrated by Cooks Illustrated. A very beautiful book, a very thick book. And they've even caught on to end papers. These just make you salivate, the beautiful end papers. This is a library book. And what makes it unique in the vegetable cookbook is that each page they list the vegetable and then they list a number of recipes. For example, page 344 is potatoes. So we'll turn to potatoes. Here's an article about potatoes, about the shopping, the storage, vegetable science, all about potatoes, talking about the different varieties, the russets, Yukon Golds, the red potatoes, and then vegetable prep, cutting potatoes for French fries, etc., etc. And then all these wonderful recipes. Slow cooker mashed potatoes, braised red potatoes with lemon and chives. And then, of course, salt crusted fingerling potatoes. Okay, another category of the books that we found that we enjoy are the field guides. This one's particularly Sally's favorite because you learn to identify common backyard weeds. How often have you not been on a hike and you wonder what something is? Well, this is a comprehensive guide. It has, again, common ragweed, nice identifiable pictures, the fruit, the leaves, where you'll find it, an overview about the plant.
But my favorite part is where it says how to get rid of it.
Oh, sure.
And what it's good for. That's why this book is unique and different from most field guides. She really went to extra effort to find some redeeming characteristic of a weed, which in all cases she was unable to find, but in most cases she could find something.
She could find something.
And she's a local person. She's a Minneapolis author.
Here's stinging nettle. We've all pulled that out without a glove.
Yes.
Had the tale to tell. So,
I've seen Robert actually eat the top of one.
oh,
The
okay.
tops don't have the...
Weeds of the Upper Midwest by Teresa Marone.
And then,
Then this was another one of Sally's
well,
favorites.
it's by the same author.
It's by the same author, Wild Berries and Fruits. And you said she has another one about
Mushrooms.
mushrooms.
But this, you know, this is something that fits in your pocket. And if you're on a hike, you know you've been there and you've looked at this plant and you've gone, what is that berry? And here it is. You can find it in here because you're curious. It's a colorful berry in the middle of the forest, and that's what a field guide helps you do. This, by the way, is a thimbleberry.
Some other pocket guides that I have liked are these two on butterflies. This one's by the Waterford Press, Minnesota Butterflies and Moths. It's stiff paper. It's covered in plastic. This one even lists the caterpillars and what the pupa look like, which is helpful because sometimes you find these things and you wonder, is that a friend or a foe in my garden? So butterflies, dragonflies, and moths, and it just folds up. Another one, Butterflies in Your Pocket, a field guide to butterflies of the upper Midwest. This is from Iowa State University. Their entomology department had some input to this. This again, it shows you here where you have your divided thing. This is the front side of the wing, and this is the back side of the wing. It tells you in the front what that means. So it's always important when you get these is that you read all the information. Butterflies in Your Pocket. You read the key, the upper side and the underside.
I think this might be a series. I think I've seen other field guides with that pocket on them, which indicates that you could carry it with you.
This is the University of Iowa Press, but it's from Iowa State University Insect Department. Then another one I found right here in Minnesota. It's by a well-named author at a conservation reserve up by Grand Rapids. This is a pocket size, quick reference to wildflowers. And what makes this ideal is that the thumb index, it's by the color of the blossom. Because you know how sometimes those leaves all look the same. Anyway, I found, like here's purple prairie clover. You will see that a lot in restored prairies. And then here's mostly blue, mostly purple, mostly orange. And here's spotted knapweed and New England aster. You see those wild. And the
excellent source for migrating butterflies and insects.
Here's the common milkweed, cardinal flower. These are two native plants that you will see around. But the color index here, this author has a lot of other birds, the wildfowl, wild water birds, birds of the Midwest, butterflies of the Midwest, birds of prey, and fishes of the Midwest. And he's well known, so what's his name? Stan Kalia.
For those books that are just wonderful about nature, where it's not specific about a plant, but about connecting you with some of the issues or some of the passions that people have. And the first two books are by Robin Wall Kimmerer, and her first book was about moss. And everyone who's read this book says you can't believe how excited you can get about moss the way she writes about it. It's a very simple plant, but this is just a wonderful description of how it grows and how it's valuable, and it's a pleasant read along with being very, very educational. This is getting a lot of press because it really is designed to connect people with plants. It's from a Native American perspective. She's a Native American partially, and she's trying to make us understand how valuable and helpful and how plants are put here for our benefit and to make our lives better, and we need to work with them to do that. It's very peaceful, calming. It's just a different way to look at a lot of things, but not in an alarming way, just why didn't I think of that myself kind of thing.
There's a chapter in here on gratitude that is just so inspiring and so thoughtful. I have read it several times. You will find this book a very calming and restorative
and
experience.
Hopeful. It's a hopeful book.
Yes.
It provides a lot of hope. On a completely different topic, Mary Larshire, who did this book, is the editor of the Northern Gardener, the Horticulture Society's magazine, and she has been for a long time. And she wrote, this is a book collecting a lot of the wisdom from that magazine, which has been published for about 150 years. And it has lots of chapters about different plants, but she talks about how this book helped her become a better gardener, because she learned so many things from so many different sources over such a long time. It's just really interesting about the history of how things were grown in Minnesota and how things were introduced in Minnesota, what native things were incorporated and improved, obviously, and of course all those discussions of the plants that we use for food, but also the plants that we use for decoration. Here's what happens when you are exposed to people who really know what they are doing. You learn that you can cut back some perennials in June to keep them flopping over in August. You learn that the old advice about putting a fish head in the planting hole for a tomato really does work. You learn that many times it is better not to dig, just cover things with mulch and compost. You learn how important it is to know which conditions a plant needs: sun, shade, wind protection, and that choosing sites with those conditions makes all the difference between a garden filled with fruit and blooms and one that looks sad and struggling. You learn that, yes, indeed, it is all about the soil. You may even learn some botanical Latin. So a book filled with lots of information. There's zone information, there's recipes, pretty much all the gardening information that's been distilled from that wonderful Northern Gardener magazine is in this great book.
She also talks about the period of time when Northern Gardener and the University of Minnesota, or the Minnesota Historical Horticulture Society and the University of Minnesota were together in research, and how they separated and have both put Minnesota in the forefront. And we are in the forefront of many types of hybridization and many types of foods, such as apples.
That comes in the next book.
Oh, okay.
But no, she does. This book is a wonderful history of Minnesota and a history of gardening and food production in Minnesota. The next book I'm going to talk about is similar but different, because it's the 10 Plants That Changed Minnesota by Mary Hockenberry Meyer. Mary Meyer is a star in our book because she's done tremendous research on ornamental grasses at the Arboretum. But this book covers 10 plants that changed Minnesota, and as I understand it, they did a survey amongst a large number of people to determine which 10 plants they should research. Oh, the other author is Susan Davis Price, and the plants that were chosen are alfalfa, and I had no idea. We were so famous for the alfalfa that grows here, and alfalfa is a perennial crop, forage crop that makes hay. It's very high in nutrition because it's a legume. So alfalfa is a real cornerstone of industries which feed animals, and the growing of it is important. Obviously apples. Anybody who knows anything about Minnesota horticulture knows that early on we were known as the place you'd never move to because there was no apples that could grow here. And a number of very determined people spent their lifetimes making sure that we had apples to grow, and the university still does a lot of research along that. Corn, of course, nobody who lives here doesn't realize we grow corn. Lawns and turf grass, we could have skipped that, but you know, it's in here. Purple loosestrife, which is actually an invasive plant. Soybeans, another cornerstone of our agriculture industry, and wheat. White pine, which was mentioned in one of the children's books we talked about earlier, was one of the reasons people came to Minnesota to start with, to harvest the white pine, and it's still, of course, a wonderful part of our landscape. And wild rice, which is an indigenous food that has been cultivated now and is available everywhere because we were introduced to it. So those are the 10 plants that changed Minnesota. And along with the science and the horticulture, there's a lot of history and politics that go along with plants and plant development. And before I let go of Mary Meyer, I'd like to recommend quickly some other books that she has done. She's done some things that have really been valuable to the horticulture community in Minnesota. She has her ornamental grasses for cold climates. And all these books are, of course, available at the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum. And then this really fun book for those people that have to do a hillside or just have a site that just is a war zone for you and the plants. The best plants for 30 tough sites. And it describes what kind of site. Maybe it's too shady, maybe it's too gravelly, maybe it's too hot and sun scorched, or it's overrun with something else. So some excellent advice about that. So Mary Meyer is a very well-respected and productive researcher at the University of Minnesota. She just retired, so we won't see quite as much from her, although she's already spoken for us. So I don't have the last books I'd like to talk about, but one of the most influential nature writers right now is Douglas Talmy. The last book that I read by him was called The Nature of Oaks, and this book is fascinating because it's not a really big book, but it talks about what's happening in the life of an oak tree every month of the year. And he starts with October, which is actually after they produce their nuts. Their nuts are actually produced more midsummer. But just what it's doing and what's living on it. And the most astonishing chapter was January, because there are some birds that overwinter in Minnesota or in cold climates, and there are still caterpillars and insects living in the oak tree, in the crevices on the bark, that they are harvesting. And they know that because they've taken the birds and looked at the contents of their stomachs to know what they're getting. And the oak tree is producing food for birds and other wildlife 12 months of the year. They are our most productive tree. They support somewhere around 500 species of insects and birds and other wildlife. They have many, many productive aspects. And his first book was Bringing Nature's Best Hope, or Bringing Nature Home and Nature's Best Hope. In Nature's Best Hope, he's really saying, get rid of your lawn and plant native plants. If everybody would get rid of a bunch of lawn and put native plants next to each other, all the insects would be able to, and birds would be able to go from spot to spot to spot and not have to travel. So sometimes you plant a native garden and it's so far from the other native garden that you don't get any wildlife because they have to come too far. But if everything were contiguous, it would be better for the wildlife and us. We love books. If you happen to know how to contact us and you have a fabulous book about plants or nature that you'd like to recommend for our next iteration of this, we'd be open to that. But what we really want you to do is lose yourself in books and reconnect with nature. And if you have to read about it first, that's good. Getting out there is probably better, though.
Take young children, take your grandchildren, connect them with nature.